places, and so choice is limited. We live where we want. We tend to live. We segregate each other according to how much we can afford in rent or for house purchase. So you get rich areas and poor areas. Schools in the richer areas tend to be better schools. So in a system of choice where the places are limited, parents trying to get into the schools with a good reputation can't all do so. So the current system, you might call it pseudo-choice. And private schools, in this system we have now, are escape routes. And that's our opponents are objecting to that. So do I. They're escape routes mainly for the wealthy too. I object to that. But can private schools be blamed for the failure of state schools? 93% of children go to state schools. Only 7% go to private schools. If we forcibly spread the 7% around in equal numbers, would adding 7 children to every 93 in each state school tip the balance in some way? That would be about 2 children in every class of 25, which is roughly the average at the moment. So imagine you've got, and what was the phrase that was used? The chaotic children of the urban poor. Imagine you've got a class of 20-odd chaotic children of the urban poor who like getting into a bit of a punch-up and break time and don't like football, and you put in 2 kids, the 7%, from a posh background who rather like books and have got letters from their mum saying, can they be excused from sport? Is that going to tip the balance? I don't think so. If redistributing the parents were the solution, how do we explain the fact that you can have in one poor area a good school doing a good job for the disadvantaged children and other bad schools within a few hundred yards of each other quite often? As a matter of fact, Fiona in her book mentions 2 examples, don't we? One is of the Phoenix School in London and the other is the Lillian Baylor School in Lambeth, which are precisely that. Very good schools in poor areas that do a great job. That's because the state system can do a good job if it so chooses. But in practice, it fails. So what we need to understand is why it fails. Suppressing private schools will simply deepen the current monopoly, the very system that's failed. Critics of private schools claim to speak for the many, not the few. That phrase cropped up a few times today. But you've got to remember that their children will not be the losers in any system of state monopoly. Why? Because the middle-class activists who dominate politics are, of course, they're the same supportive parents who send their children to private schools. They want the best for their children. They make sure their own children succeed. Now, that can be done in more than one way. I know some people very close to the current Prime Minister, one person in particular, who I know deliberately lived in Buckingham because they have grammar schools. Kent is another county near London with grammar schools. If you get in there, you get your kids looked after in the state system. Or you move into the wealthy area where they have a good school. Or even if you send your children to a state school that overall isn't particularly wonderful, then you can, if you understand how the school works, you can gain advantages for your own child. For example, if you're a sophisticated political activist, you'll know how to put pressure on the teacher to put your child in the top set. It doesn't matter whether they call it X, Y or Z or give them names. Everybody knows there's a top set and a middle set and a second set. Currently about a quarter of our secondary schools fail the most basic test. This is the government's own criterion. That is, under 30% of pupils achieve 5 good GCSEs. They fail to provide the majority of their pupils then with an opportunity. They fail to provide the poorest children with an opportunity. Now, what goes wrong in these schools? The pressure from Whitehall is to get past that 30% threshold. Now, how's that done? That's done by focusing on the few children who are just a little bit below the 5 GCSE mark. I've come across countless teachers who've expressed frustration at the fact that they say, look, I want to focus on the most disadvantaged pupils in my class, and they're told, no, that won't get us past the 30% threshold. You've got to focus on the 2 or 3 who get the government off our backs. Let me give another example of what happens in state schools. This is not my direct experience, but that of an associate of mine. You have a school, it's a science class, you've got some chaotic children of the urban poor, to use that phrase that my colleague used earlier, and you've got some children who want to work. The teacher knows very well that the children who need to be challenged, who have unsupportive parents, if he challenges them, there'll be trouble, and he won't be backed up. He'll be told he can't control his class, he's not a very good teacher. So what happened? In this, I'm not saying this is universal, but I think it's more common than we like to think. The deal he had to strike was, okay, you stay on one side of the class and mess about, so long as you don't mess about so much that you upset the children who do want to work. It was a kind of compromise. So even, it's all very well talking about state schools as bringing everybody together. The fact is there are huge disparities within state schools. And the children from the poorest backgrounds are being failed by today's state schools. Now, other countries have shown the solution. Social democratic Sweden, for example, has a voucher scheme. They made it easy to set up private schools. Every school has a right to choose whatever school they want, state or independent, and to have the money paid for from taxes. Instead of getting on the permanent waiting list for the posh school in the wealthy neighbourhood, parents in Sweden can set up brand new schools in disadvantaged areas and have them paid for by the state. Somebody over here said earlier, what about the street sweeper? Well, the street sweeper gets the voucher. You get exactly the same spending power as the rich person from the city. That's the point of it. And remember, there's no selection, there's no topping up. If we did that, we would make private schools available to everybody. It's generally accepted across the Swedish political spectrum that competition from such private schools has had a kind of ripple effect through all the system, throughout the whole system. And it's improved the state schools as well. One final example. The same thing has been done in Milwaukee by the Democrat Party mayor in that city. He introduced a scheme whereby poor parents can claim a voucher allowing them to send their child to a private school. It's a bit like, so in other words, this voucher is only available to the poorest parents. It's a bit like here saying the only people who can have the voucher are children whose parents are poor enough to go on free school meals. This system was introduced and has been independently studied by Professor Caroline Hoxby at Harvard University. You can look her up. All these studies are online. She compared three types of school. These are state schools where 2/3 or more of the pupils had poor parents and therefore faced the threat of losing those children. Then the second group were those where it was under 2/3, and the third group where they didn't have the scheme at all, outside Milwaukee, where the schools were the same social breakdown. The schools that faced the biggest threat of losing their pupils to private schools improved the most. The schools that faced a smaller risk also improved a lot, but not quite as much. And the schools outside Milwaukee that faced no competition didn't change one way or the other. That's an independent trial of what happens when you extend purchasing power to people from disadvantaged backgrounds and you break this public sector monopoly. That's what we need to do, to embrace private schools within our system, not to get rid of them. My time is up. But the point is, the state does not offer children from poor backgrounds an equal chance of making the most of their talents. And it can't be blamed on private schools. They only take 7% of the children. It's creaming them off